Welcome to life stories where sometimes the people who love you most are the last to see who you truly are. Imagine building something extraordinary, something that saves lives, breaks records, changes an entire industry, only to have your family think you're still looking for a job. What if your greatest achievement wasn't just ignored, but completely invisible to the people who raised you? Today's story is about a woman who spent years in silence, creating a company worth millions while enduring holiday dinners where her name was barely mentioned. But one night at a celebration that wasn't hers, the truth finally came out. And nothing was ever the same again. Stay with us. This isn't just a story about success, it's about what happens when silence speaks louder than applause. Let's begin. Avery Clark hadn't spoken more than 15 words at her brother's engagement dinner. And yet, the room was about to say her name like a revelation. She stood near the corner of Leona's private dining room in Tribeca, half shielded by a floor-to-ceiling curtain of glass and candlelight. The wine in her hand was expensive, the fabric of her black dress softer than anything she owned 5 years ago, but old instincts were hard to shake. Smile, nod, stay small. That's what you do when your family still thinks you're a failure in silk. The Clark family was a dynasty of precision and performance. Her father, Dr. Thomas Clark, a world-renowned neurosurgeon, never lost a patient. Her mother, Elaine, made partner at one of Manhattan's most cutthroat law firms before Avery was in high school. And then there was Nathan, the older brother with a resume curated for the Ivy League, now chief resident at Columbia Presbyterian and newly engaged to Hopper Reed, a poised blonde from Yale who worked in corporate strategy at some Fortune 500 firm. The engagement dinner was elegant, efficient, and airless, like a resume with candles. "Let's toast to excellence," Dr. Clark had said, lifting his glass with the same gravitas he used in surgical consultations. To Nathan and Hopper, two extraordinary people continuing the Clark legacy of purpose and brilliance. Avery's hand tightened around her glass. No one toasted to silent builders. No one raised a glass for the kid who spent high school summers in the basement debugging code instead of shadowing physicians. She looked at Hopper now, so composed in her burgundy sheath dress, laughing with Nathan's colleagues, like she'd already been pre-approved as a Clark. Avery wondered if Hopper knew the truth about her. If anyone at this table did, they didn't. Not really. When Avery left for NYU Tandon, her parents had called it a temporary detour, a phase she'd outgrow before applying to law school. When she co-founded MedSync during her junior year, they thought she was helping with someone else's project. And when she quietly turned down a job offer from Google to keep building the startup full-time, they didn't even ask why. They assumed failure, or worse, irrelevance. So she stopped telling them. For 5 years, she built in silence. While Nathan climbed the ranks of medicine with family-funded ease, she lived on ramen and contract gigs, coding at 2 a.m. and pitching investors in jeans that didn't quite fit. MedSync was born out of necessity and defiance, a sleek, intuitive platform that reimagined how hospitals share patient data, cutting errors, connecting departments, saving lives. It had started with frustration. Riley Park, her co-founder, watched her mother spiral through 4 misdiagnoses before the 5th one stuck. "Technology shouldn't be the reason people die," Riley said that night over diner fries, staring at a napkin sketch of a dashboard. Avery had nodded. "Let's fix it." And they had. By 29, MedSync was integrated across 200 medical institutions nationwide. By 30, they were in final acquisition talks with Horizon Health Technologies, Hopper Reed's employer, for a deal rumored to be worth over $200 million. But Avery hadn't revealed that to anyone in her family. Not yet. As the dinner plates cleared and the conversation shifted toward future wedding venues, Hopper turned toward her with polite curiosity. "Avery, Nathan said you work in health tech?" Her spoon paused just above her creme brulee. "That's right. Which company?" There it was, the flick of a match. "I co-founded one. We build hospital communication platforms." "Oh," Hopper's interest sharpened. "Which one?" "MedSync." Hopper's lips parted, her brows knit. Then something like recognition flickered in her eyes, followed by disbelief. "Wait, you're Avery Clark, from MedSync?" Every fork stilled, Nathan looked between them, puzzled. Wait, that's your MedSync. Avery didn't move. Yes. Hopper's voice dropped. You're the founder. The Avery Clark from the deal we're about to close. She had the professional tone of someone used to wielding power, but for the first time that evening it faltered. Her eyes scanned Avery's face like she was seeing it for the first time. Elaine's glass clinked against her plate. Hopper, darling, you must be mistaken. Avery's been doing freelance work. She's not mistaken, Avery said calmly. Riley Park and I co-founded MedSync 6 years ago. I'm the CEO. Nathan stared at her like she'd just sprouted wings. You're the ghost founder, Hopper whispered, the one who won't do press. Your name was on the acquisition docs, but we assumed it was someone else, a placeholder. Avery smiled faintly. Nope, that's me. Silence, dense and suffocating. And then her father's voice brittle. Why wouldn't you tell us? Because you never asked. Because you only listened for things you already believed. Because I wanted to build something you couldn't touch. But what she said was, I needed it to be mine first. What would you do if the people who dismissed your dreams suddenly wanted a seat at your table? Have you ever hidden your success to protect yourself from the people closest to you? As Hopper looked at Avery with new respect and a hint of fear, Avery realized this wasn't just a dinner. It was a reckoning. And the next move would change everything. Avery didn't remember walking to the window, only that her hands were cold against the glass. Behind her, the dinner table buzzed again, half with shock, half with speculation. But the moment Hopper said her name like that, like it meant something, the room had tilted. It wasn't the revelation that stunned her the most. It was the panic that followed. She should have felt triumphant, vindicated. Her success laid bare, undeniable. But instead, she felt stripped, raw, like someone had pulled back the curtain before she was ready. Behind her, Nathan was still talking, trying to reconcile the version of Avery he had known, messy, quiet, unfocused, with the woman who had just upended a multi-million-dollar acquisition. You're serious, he said again, like repetition might bring clarity. You're that Avery Clark. She turned slowly. I've always been Avery Clark. Hopper was already in problem-solving mode, though a vein in her neck still pulsed. I need to speak to legal. If we're negotiating with your company and I'm marrying into your family, we may have a conflict of interest we need to disclose. No, Avery cut in. We've never discussed the deal, and I've been operating under strict NDAs. You have too. This dinner doesn't breach anything. Hopper blinked. You're right, she said carefully. But Horizon will need to know. They'll want to review everything, especially with the deal this close. Avery nodded. Of course. And then Hopper added, a little softer, I hope it doesn't ruin things. I had no idea. But it already had. Not legally, not professionally, emotionally, because her parents were staring at her like strangers. And not for the first time, Avery realized that no matter how big her world became, she was still seeking something impossibly small, recognition from the two people least capable of giving it. She didn't want them to apologize. She wanted them to understand. After dessert, her mother cornered her near the bathroom. You should have told us, Elaine said, her voice lowered but sharp. We've been worried. All those years thinking you were floundering. I wasn't hiding, Avery said. I was protecting something fragile. You should have trusted us. I did, she said, until I couldn't. Elaine's jaw tightened. This isn't a movie, Avery. You don't get to show up at dinner and rewrite the family dynamic. Avery smiled bitterly. Neither do you. That night, she sat awake in her apartment, the city humming just beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her inbox was already filling, Horizon's legal team requesting clarification, her co-founder Riley forwarding press inquiries with subject lines like urgent and crisis comms needed. Avery didn't respond. She just stared at her own reflection in the glass. She looked composed, fierce even. But inside, her foundation was rattled. She hadn't built MedSync to prove them wrong. That was the truth. But some small bruised part of her had hoped they'd see her differently once it was big enough, once she was undeniable. And now, that moment had come. And it didn't feel like victory. It felt like exposure. Her phone buzzed, a text from Riley. I know you didn't want to go public yet, but maybe this is the moment. Maybe it's time. Time for what? To hand the narrative over to a media machine hungry for a female founder story wrapped in family drama? Or worse, to let her parents recast the past as if they believed in her all along? No, not yet. The next morning brought a different surprise. Hopper called. "I spoke to Horizon," she said, getting straight to the point. "They want a face-to-face with you tomorrow. Just you, no Riley." Avery's stomach clenched. Why? They're concerned about clarity of leadership. It's a routine conversation, but I won't sugarcoat it. They're reassessing the acquisition timeline. Avery heard what she didn't say. The company had trusted her brilliance more when she was invisible. And now that they could see her, they weren't so sure. "Do they think I'm a liability now?" she asked. There was a pause. "They think you might be emotionally compromised, given your family connection." Avery laughed, short and bitter. "I was emotionally compromised long before last night." She hung up before she said something she couldn't take back. Later that day, she met Riley in their office, overlooking the East River. Riley was scrolling through Twitter, where "Who is Avery Clark" was beginning to trend. "They've started digging," Riley said. "You're about to become a narrative." Avery sat down hard on the arm of the couch. "What kind?" "That depends," Riley said, looking at her carefully. "Are you the brilliant visionary who rose from invisibility, or the wildcard founder who hid herself even from her board?" Avery knew how easily the truth could be reshaped. And for the first time in a long time, she was afraid, not of failure, but of misrepresentation, of being turned into someone else's lesson. She took a breath, then said, "Let's schedule the interview." Riley raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "I'd rather tell my story than let them write it for me." But as Avery walked into the conference room the next day, past executives who now studied her like a case file, she wasn't sure who she was doing it for anymore. Herself, the company, or the girl who once built websites in secret just to feel alive. Have you ever felt like claiming your truth might cost you everything you've worked for? As Avery finally steps into the spotlight, she discovers that visibility isn't the end of the battle. It's only the beginning. The room was glass and silence. Avery sat alone at the far end of the Horizon conference table, the Manhattan skyline blurred behind her, the Hudson River smudged in soft winter light. Across from her sat 5 executives, gray suits, guarded expressions, coffee cups untouched. They weren't here to admire her resume. They were here to measure her risk. "You've built something impressive," one of them said. His name was William Faulkner. No relation, no poetry. "But this acquisition is more than product, it's reputation, stability." Avery nodded. "And I've provided that, quietly, efficiently, for years." "Yes," said another woman, brows knitted. "But now your story is public, and some board members are questioning whether the founder who avoided press for 6 years can lead at scale under scrutiny." There it was, she inhaled. "I understand the concern, but let me ask you something. Would you question that if I were a man?" A pause. The woman looked slightly away. William didn't blink. "This has nothing to do with gender." "No?" Avery asked gently. "Then why is confidence in my leadership shaken the moment you see my face?" "My press-shy behavior was strategic. It allowed the company to scale without distraction, without ego. You praised it until you realized the person behind it doesn't fit your template." More silence, the kind that carries weight. "I built MedSync," she continued, "not to be famous, but to fix something broken. And I've succeeded. Our client retention is 97%. Our platform cut error rates by over 40%. We're helping real people, not just bottom lines." William shifted in his seat. "But now the narrative is out of your control." "No," Avery said quietly. "Now it's finally mine." They looked at her. Not past her, not through her, at her. And in that moment she knew, whether the deal closed or not, she had stepped fully into her name. That afternoon, she returned to the office and found Riley pacing by the windows, phone pressed to her ear. She hung up as soon as Avery walked in. "Well, I told them the truth," Avery said. "And they're going forward. Slight delay, more oversight. But we're still on track." Riley exhaled. "God, Avery." But Avery didn't collapse into relief. Instead, she walked over to the whiteboard, still covered in scribbles from last week's design sprint, and picked up a marker. "What are you doing?" Riley asked. "Redrawing the roadmap," she replied. If we're going to be visible, we need to be undeniable. Later that night, she stood on her balcony, looking out at the sprawl of New York, remembering a different girl, 16, sleepless, eating vending machine snacks under the glow of her monitor, writing code no one would ever see. She hadn't changed. She'd simply come into focus. The next week brought interviews, articles, panel requests, and, surprisingly, invitations, high school coding clubs, women in tech summits, med schools asking her to speak. She said yes, not to prove anything, but to open a door behind her. Then came a knock at her own. It was Nathan. He held a paper bag that smelled faintly like garlic and regret. "Dinner," he said. "From that Thai place near campus." Avery let him in. They sat on the floor of her kitchen like they were 20 again. He picked at his pad thigh, then looked up. "I read every article," he said. "Watched the whole CNBC interview." She waited. "I didn't know," he continued. "How much you'd done. How much I'd missed." Avery softened. "You didn't want to know. I think I didn't want to believe you were more than I imagined. That I was more than your messy little sister." He winced. "Yeah." She looked at him. This man who used to read her bedtime stories and also forget her birthday, who cheered the loudest at her science fair, then forgot to ask if she won. "I think," she said slowly, "I kept you out of my life so you couldn't diminish it." "I get that." He paused. "But I'm proud of you, Avery, truly. I was just too wrapped up in my own version of success to recognize someone else's." She didn't say thank you. Instead, she passed him a spring roll. It was enough. The acquisition closed 3 weeks later. The numbers made headlines. So did the story, the ghost founder who rewrote the rules. But it was what came after that mattered most. Elaine called, awkward and earnest. "I read your interview, twice. I didn't understand before, but I'm starting to. Would you ever show me the platform? Just a demo?" Dr. Clark, in his own way, reached out through Hopper. "Your father would like to attend your next keynote," she said. "He's curious." Curious. That was new. Hopper became both sister and partner, navigating the acquisition from one side and family dinners from the other. "I underestimated you," she admitted over drinks one night. Avery smiled. "That makes two of us." She began mentoring again. One girl, Ava, reminded her of herself. Bright, shy, underestimated. "My parents want me to go to law school," Ava confessed, "but I want to build apps." "Then build," Avery said, "even if no one claps. Especially then." One spring afternoon, Avery stood before a packed auditorium at MIT, looking out at rows of eager young faces. "Success isn't about who claps for you," she told them. "It's about who you become in the quiet. It's about holding your vision when no one else can see it." She paused, heartful. "And sometimes it's about forgiving those who never knew how to look." She stepped down to a standing ovation, not for the press or the money, but for the woman she had become. And somewhere in the crowd she saw her father, standing, clapping. What part of Avery's journey resonated most with you? Comment 100 if you felt this story in your heart. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. Share this video with a friend who needs to believe in their own quiet power. Thank you for watching Life Stories.